It always starts the same way. You're moving fast, faster than you should be in a public place. Weaving around rolling suitcases and families, who somehow manage to stop walking exactly where you need to go. Your heart is pounding, not because you've been running for long, but because every few steps you glance down at your phone and see the same thing staring back at you in unforgiving numbers. 2 minutes. That's all you have left. 2 minutes until boarding closes. Not until the plane takes off. Not until the gate disappears from the screen. But until that invisible line is crossed. You tell yourself you can make it. You always tell yourself that. You cut through a coffee line. Dodge a cart. Ignore the voice in your head reminding you that you should have left earlier. And then, finally, you see it. The gate. The screen still shows your flight number. The plane is still there. Relief hits you instantly. This is the moment where most people think the story has a happy ending. But this is also the exact moment where everything can go wrong. You step up to the desk, breathless, already halfway through explaining why you're late. When the gate agent looks at their screen, then looks back at you, and calmly says the words no traveler ever expects to hear when the aircraft is still visible outside the window. I'm sorry. The flight is closed. Closed. Not boarding. Not delayed. Closed. And suddenly, the idea that you missed your flight by 2 minutes doesn't feel small at all. It feels massive. Because in that moment, time stops working the way you understand it. 2 minutes doesn't mean 2 minutes anymore. It means something else entirely. It means a door has been shut, not just physically, but digitally and no amount of explaining how close you were seems to matter. What most passengers don't realize is that airports don't run on common sense. They run on systems, rigid, layered, interlocking systems that don't care how hard you ran or how unfair it feels. To you, the plane is still there. The door is still visible. And the idea that you can't just step on board feels absurd. To the airline, that flight has already moved into a different phase of existence. It's no longer a group of people waiting to leave. It's a calculated object with finalized numbers, locked manifests, and schedules that extend far beyond that single gate. When the gate closes, it isn't symbolic. It's a signal that dozens of processes have already started running in the background. This is where the emotional shock really hits. Because missing a flight by an hour feels like your fault. Missing it by 2 minutes feels like a betrayal. Your brain immediately starts negotiating. Surely there's flexibility. Surely someone can make an exception. Surely the rule can bend just this once. And sometimes, it can. But sometimes, it absolutely cannot. And the worst part is that from the outside, there's no way to tell which situation you're in. You're standing there, looking at the same plane you were supposed to be on, while the reality of your trip begins to unravel in real time. In that moment, you're not just late. You're out of sync with the system. And once that happens, every next step becomes harder. Your boarding pass may already be invalid. Your seat might already be reassigned. Your connection could already be canceling itself somewhere in the background. The gate agent isn't deciding your fate out of spite. In many cases, they're reacting to a status that was determined minutes ago by software you'll never see. Software that doesn't know you. Software that doesn't care that it was only 2 minutes. This is why the moment feels so brutal. Because it looks simple from the outside and impossibly complicated on the inside. You're standing at the intersection of human urgency and machine finality. And almost always, the machine wins. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Airlines rarely explain clearly. There is no such thing as just 2 minutes in aviation. The phrase sounds harmless when we use it in everyday life. 2 minutes late to dinner means nothing. 2 minutes late to a meeting is barely noticed. But in air travel, 2 minutes can exist on the wrong side of a deadline you didn't even know was there. That's where the myth begins. The idea that if the plane hasn't left yet, you should still be allowed to board. Airlines don't operate on departure time alone. They operate on a timeline that backs up from that moment, with specific cutoffs that are non-negotiable. Boarding often ends 10, 15, sometimes even 20 minutes before departure. Not because airlines enjoy inconveniencing people, but because everything that happens next requires certainty. Once boarding ends, the airline needs to know exactly who is on that aircraft and who is not. That list feeds into multiple systems at once. And those systems don't pause or wait for one last passenger running down the concourse. This is where frustration turns into confusion for most travelers. You see a plane that clearly hasn't moved. You assume nothing important has happened yet. But behind the scenes, a lot already has. The passenger manifest is finalized. The crew completes safety counts. Cargo loading is adjusted based on the number of people actually on board. The captain may already be reviewing final paperwork. In other words, the flight has mentally departed, even if it hasn't physically done so. This is why gate agents often sound rehearsed. When they say the flight is closed, they aren't brushing you off. They're responding to a status that carries legal and operational weight. Reopening that flight isn't as simple as clicking a button or unlocking a door. It can require supervisor approval, coordination with the flight deck, and updates across several systems. And sometimes, by the time you arrive, it's already too late to reverse any of that without causing delays that ripple outward to other flights, other crews, and other airports. From the airline's perspective, 2 minutes late isn't late at all. It's late plus every minute required to undo what's already been done. That's where the math stops working in your favor. Adding one passenger doesn't add 1 minute. It can add 10 or 15, and that's before factoring in missed departure slots, crew duty limits, and air traffic control restrictions. Suddenly, letting you on board isn't about kindness anymore. It's about whether the entire operation can absorb the disruption. This is also why you'll sometimes see another passenger in a similar situation get waved through and wonder why it didn't happen for you. Timing matters, but context matters even more. If systems haven't locked yet, flexibility exists. If they have, the window is gone. From your point of view, the difference between those two realities may be measured in seconds. You didn't even know, counted. The myth of just 2 minutes survives because airlines don't explain this well, and because, on rare occasions, exceptions do happen. Those exceptions make people believe the rule is fake, but the rule is very real. It's just invisible until you run headfirst into it. From the outside, it feels like the simplest solution in the world. The plane is right there. The door is closed, but it's not gone. The jet bridge is still attached. In your mind, all it would take is someone pressing a button, reopening the door, and letting you walk on. That assumption is exactly what makes this moment so frustrating, because it feels like a refusal instead of a limitation. But once boarding closes, reopening the flight is no longer a small decision. It becomes a structural problem. The first thing that locks in is the passenger count. Airlines are required to know exactly how many people are on board before a flight departs. This isn't a casual head count. It's a legal and safety requirement. Once boarding ends, the final manifest is generated, and that number is used across multiple systems. If even one person is added after that point, the count becomes wrong. That means the crew must be notified, the system must be updated, and the safety verification process has to be redone. It doesn't sound dramatic, but aviation safety is built on eliminating assumptions. If the numbers don't match, the flight doesn't move forward, then there's weight and balance, which is one of the least visible but most critical parts of flight operations. Every aircraft is carefully balanced based on how many passengers are on board, where they're seated, how much luggage is in the cargo hold, and how fuel is distributed. This balance affects how the plane climbs, how it handles turbulence, and even how it lands. Adding a single passenger after calculations are finalized means those calculations are no longer valid. In some cases, the difference is negligible. In others, especially on smaller aircraft or full flights, it isn't. Either way, the rules don't care how small the change seems. If the math is wrong, it has to be redone. Now add timing to the equation. Planes don't simply push back whenever they're ready. Airports are tightly coordinated environments, and every departing aircraft is assigned a specific pushback window. Miss that window, and the plane may have to wait for another opening. That delay doesn't just affect your flight. It affects every other plane scheduled to use that same runway, gate, or airspace corridor. One reopened door can ripple outward in ways passengers never see, delaying connections, crews, and even flights at other airports. Crew schedules are another invisible pressure point. Pilots and flight attendants operate under strict duty time limits. If a flight is delayed long enough, the crew may legally time out, meaning they can't fly anymore. That can result in cancellations, overnight delays, or scrambling to find replacement crew. From the airline's perspective, reopening a closed flight isn't just about helping one passenger. It's about risking an entire operation. This is why gate agents often look torn in these moments. They're standing between a person who is clearly distressed and a system that does not bend easily. In some cases, the agent may call a supervisor or contact the flight deck to see if reopening is possible. But even that takes time, and time is exactly what's already been lost. While you're waiting for an answer, the system keeps moving forward. Fueling finishes, paperwork gets signed, clearance is confirmed, the window closes further. There's also the issue of security protocols. Once a flight is closed, the assumption is that no new passengers will board. Reopening the door can trigger additional checks to ensure that no unauthorized access occurred, and that all passengers on board have been properly screened. Again, These steps aren't negotiable. They exist because aviation safety is built on redundancy. Every layer is designed to catch what the previous layer might miss. From the passenger's point of view, all of this feels excessive. You're not asking to change the destination or delay the flight by an hour. You're just asking to sit in the seats you already paid for. But the system doesn't see it that way. It sees a finalized process being interrupted. And once a process is finalized in aviation, reversing it is never simple. This is the core disconnect that makes missing a flight by 2 minutes feel so cruel. You're judging the situation based on what you can see. The airline is judging it based on what has already happened. By the time you reach the gate, the most important decisions may already be behind you. The door didn't close when you arrived. It closed earlier, quietly, without any drama, while you were still running. That's why the phrase, "we can't reopen the door," isn't an excuse. It's a shorthand for a long list of consequences that most passengers are never told about. And once you understand that, the situation doesn't feel fair. But it does start to make sense. If the rules were as rigid as they often sound, the story would end at the closed gate, every single time. But anyone who flies often knows that sometimes, against all expectations, the door does open. Someone is waved through. Boarding is briefly restarted. A passenger slips onto the plane at the last possible second. These moments are rare, but they're real. And they're exactly why missing a flight by 2 minutes feels so confusing and unfair. Because if it can happen sometimes, why not every time? The answer lies in the thin, invisible space between policy and discretion. Airlines operate on strict rules, but those rules are enforced by people. And people make decisions based on timing, context, authority, and risk. If a flight hasn't fully transitioned into its locked phase, there may still be room to maneuver. That window can be incredibly small, sometimes measured in seconds, and it often closes without warning. When you arrive at the gate, you have no way of knowing whether you're standing just inside that window or just outside it. One of the biggest factors is whether the flight deck has finalized its paperwork. If the captain has not yet signed off on the final numbers, there may still be a chance to add a passenger. Once that sign-off happens, reopening the flight becomes far more complicated. Another factor is whether the aircraft has finished loading cargo and fuel. If ground operations are still active, the system may allow changes. If those steps are complete, flexibility drops sharply. There's also the question of how many passengers are missing. If several people haven't shown up, the airline may already be planning adjustments. In that situation, adding one more passenger may not disrupt anything significantly. But if the flight is full and every seat is accounted for, adding a late passenger can trigger a cascade of the same action that's easy on one flight can be impossible on another, even within the same airline. This is where the gate agent's role becomes critical. Some agents have more experience, more confidence, or more authority than others. Some are willing to make the call to a supervisor or the flight deck. Others are trained to follow the system strictly and avoid taking risks. Neither approach is necessarily wrong. Agents are evaluated on efficiency, on-time departures, and compliance with procedures. Helping one passenger can sometimes mean hurting dozens of others. And agents are constantly weighing that balance. Your behavior in that moment also matters more than most people realize. Airlines rarely admit this openly, but human psychology plays a role. A calm, respectful passenger who acknowledges the situation is far more likely to receive help than someone who arrives angry or demanding. This isn't about punishment. It's about trust. An agent who feels respected is more willing to invest effort on your behalf. An agent who feels attacked is more likely to shut down and stick to the rulebook. There are also situations where external factors create flexibility. Delays caused by weather, maintenance, or air traffic control can buy time. If a flight is already running late, reopening boarding may not create additional problems. In those cases, the agent's decision isn't about you at all. It's about whether the system has already been disrupted enough that one more change doesn't matter. This inconsistency is what frustrates passengers the most. Two people can miss the same flight by the same amount of time and receive completely different outcomes. One boards, one doesn't. From the outside, it looks arbitrary. From the inside, it's situational. Each flight exists in its own operational bubble, and small differences in timing or status can lead to completely different decisions. When people talk about getting lucky at the gate, this is what they mean. Luck isn't random here. It's the alignment of unfinished processes, available authority, and a human decision made at the right moment. You can't plan for it, and you can't demand it. You can only hope the conditions allow it. Understanding this doesn't make missing a flight hurt less, but it does explain why the rule sometimes bends and sometimes snaps. The door isn't opening because someone decided to be nice. It's opening because, in that brief moment, opening it didn't break anything else. Once the aircraft pushes back from the gate, something important happens in the airline system that most passengers never think about. Your status changes. You're no longer someone who is late. You become a no-show. That label is more than a description. It's a trigger. The moment the system marks you as a no, a series of automatic decisions begin unfolding, often without any human involvement at all. For many tickets, especially non-refundable or basic economy fares, being marked as a no-show can cancel the rest of your itinerary. That means your return flight, your connections, and any remaining segments tied to that booking may disappear instantly. To the system, you didn't just miss one flight, you abandoned the trip. And once that assumption is made, reversing it becomes harder with every passing minute. This is where shock turns into panic for a lot of travelers. People assume that missing one leg of a journey only affects that leg. In reality, airline pricing is built around the assumption that you'll fly every segment in order. When that order is broken, the fare itself can be considered invalid. It feels extreme, but it's written into the rules most people agree to without reading. What happens next depends heavily on why you missed the flight. If the airline believes the delay was your responsibility, your options are limited. Traffic, oversleeping, long security lines, or misjudging boarding time usually fall into this category. In these cases, the airline may offer to rebook you on the next available flight, but there may be a fee, and there is no guarantee it will be free. Sometimes the only option is to buy a brand new ticket at whatever price is available that day. If the delay was caused by the airline, the situation changes dramatically. Tight connections sold by the airline, delayed inbound flights, mechanical issues, or last-minute gate changes can shift responsibility away from you. When that happens, airlines are far more likely to rebook you without additional cost. They may also prioritize you on standby lists or protect your remaining itinerary. The difference between these two scenarios can feel unfair, but from the airline's perspective, it's about accountability. Timing matters more than most people realize. If you speak to an agent immediately after missing the flight, your chances improve. Once the system fully processes the no-show and reallocates your seat, options shrink. Seats that were yours minutes ago may already be sold to standby passengers or released back into inventory. The longer you wait, the more final everything becomes. There's also a psychological element at play. Agents who encounter you right away can often intervene before the system locks everything down. Agents who see you hours later are working with fewer tools. This is why walking away from the gate in frustration can actually make things worse. Even if you're upset, staying engaged and asking for help immediately can preserve options you didn't realize you had. One of the most painful surprises for travelers is discovering that their return flight has been cancelled without warning. People only notice when they check their app or try to board days later. At that point, the airline often explains that the itinerary was voided because the first segment wasn't flown. It feels punitive, but again, it's procedural. The system assumes intent where there may have been none. This is also where travel insurance and fare class start to matter. Flexible tickets, elite status, and airline loyalty can all soften the impact. Basic economy fares, on the other hand, are designed to be unforgiving. They offer lower prices in exchange for fewer protections. When something goes wrong, there's very little wiggle room. Missing a flight by 2 minutes doesn't just affect your schedule. It can rewrite your entire trip. The ticket you thought you had may effectively cease to exist, replaced by a new set of choices that are often more expensive and far less convenient. And all of it happens quickly, quietly, and according to rules most passengers never fully understand until they're caught inside them. There's a window of time after missing a flight that most airlines will never advertise, but frequent travelers learn about it the hard way. It's often referred to informally as the golden hour. This is the period shortly after a missed departure, when options still exist. Systems haven't fully hardened, and human intervention can still make a difference. It's not a written policy, and it's not guaranteed, but it's real enough that it can completely change the outcome of a bad situation. During this window, the airline systems are still in transition. The flight you missed has departed, but the ripple effects of that departure are still unfolding. Seats on upcoming flights may not yet be fully assigned. Standby lists may still be fluid. Supervisors may still have the authority to override automated decisions. Once enough time passes, those opportunities disappear as the system settles into its new state. What matters most during this period is speed and composure. Passengers who act quickly are far more likely to receive help than those who hesitate or walk away in frustration. This doesn't mean rushing angrily from counter to counter. It means calmly engaging with a first available airline representative and clearly explaining what happened. The goal is not to argue, but to be present while options still exist. How you communicate in this moment has a surprising impact. Agents hear complaints all day. What they respond to is reasonableness. A passenger who acknowledges responsibility, even partially, often receives more assistance than one who insists the airline is entirely at fault. This isn't about fairness. It's about cooperation. When an agent believes you're working with them rather than against them, they're more likely to explore alternatives on your behalf. This is also the time to ask the right questions. Asking whether there are later flights, whether standby is available, or whether your remaining itinerary can be protected signals that you understand the situation. It shows flexibility. Demanding to be put on the original flight after it's gone does not. The golden hour is about adapting to what's possible, not insisting on what's no longer available. Airline apps play a role here too. While you're speaking to an agent, the app may already be offering rebooking options. Sometimes those options are worse than what an agent can provide. Other times, they're faster. Using both simultaneously increases your chances. You may find a seat yourself, while the agent works on something better, or vice versa. The key is staying active. Elite status and loyalty can also quietly influence outcomes during this window. Frequent flyers often have access to dedicated customer service lines or priority rebooking tools. Even without status, simply being polite and patient can elevate how much effort an agent is willing to put in. People want to help people who make their jobs easier. The golden hour isn't a magic fix. It won't undo every missed flight, but it's often the difference between being stranded until the next day and finding a way forward the same afternoon. Once that window closes, the system becomes far less forgiving. Seats fill, fees appear, options narrow. Missing a flight by 2 minutes feels final. But in reality, there's a brief period where the story is still being written. What you do during that time can determine whether the missed flight becomes a minor inconvenience or a full-blown travel disaster. The reason missing a flight by 2 minutes feels so emotionally charged is because people have lived through wildly different outcomes under almost identical circumstances. These stories circulate in airports, online forums, and late-night conversations between travelers, and they all point to the same unsettling truth. The system is structured, but the experience is deeply human. One passenger misses a flight by less than a minute because security took longer than expected. They arrive at the gate just as the agent is closing the door. They don't yell. They don't argue. They explain what happened, accept that the situation is bad, and ask if there's anything that can be done. The agent checks the system, calls a supervisor, and quietly reopens boarding. The passenger walks onto the plane, heart racing, aware that the entire cabin is watching. They take their seat, embarrassed but relieved. That flight leaves on time. To everyone else, it looks like an exception. To the airline, it was a window that hadn't quite closed yet. Another passenger misses a flight under almost identical circumstances. Same airport, same airline, same delay at security. But this time, the door has been closed just long enough for the paperwork to be signed. The system has locked. The agent apologizes and explains there's nothing they can do. The passenger reacts with frustration, raising their voice, insisting the rule makes no sense. That reaction doesn't create options. It narrows them. The passenger leaves the gate angry and confused, only to discover that their return flight has been cancelled as well. The difference between these two outcomes feels cruel, but it often comes down to timing, measured in seconds, and behavior, measured in tone. There's the story of the wedding guest, who missed a flight by 90 seconds. Because a shuttle bus broke down, they arrived convinced they'd ruined everything. The agent saw the situation, recognized that the plane hadn't finished loading, and quietly made a call. That passenger was rebooked on a later flight at no extra cost and still made it to the ceremony. For them, the airline felt compassionate. For the person standing behind them in line, who missed a different flight that same day, the airline felt heartless. There's also the business traveler who missed a connection due to a delayed inbound flight. They assumed the airline would take care of everything. Instead, they arrived at the gate to find their seat already given away. Angry and exhausted, they demanded answers, recorded the interaction on their phone, and accused the agent of incompetence. The situation escalated. Security got involved. The traveler was rebooked the next day, at a higher fare, with no hotel provided. Their story becomes one of injustice. The airline's version becomes one of disruption. Then there are the lucky ones, the passengers who miss a flight, assume all is lost, and somehow walk away with a better outcome than expected. A last seat on a later flight, an upgrade they didn't ask for, a reroute that gets them home sooner. These stories are the most dangerous because they create false hope. They make people believe there's always a workaround. There isn't. Luck isn't reliable. It's situational. What these stories reveal is not favoritism or randomness, but fragility. The system works most of the time, but when something breaks, outcomes depend on timing, context, authority, and human judgment. The same action can lead to completely different results on different days, at different gates, with different agents. For passengers, this inconsistency feels personal. For airlines, it's operational. Both perspectives are true at the same time, and that's what makes missing a flight by 2 minutes such a uniquely painful experience. You don't just lose time, you lose certainty. You're forced to confront how little control you actually have once the system moves on without you. When you miss a flight by 2 minutes, the most important thing you can do is resist the urge to freeze or explode. That moment feels overwhelming, but it's also when your actions matter most. The system has moved on, but not everything is final yet. What you do in the minutes immediately after can shape the rest of your day, or even your entire trip. The first step is to go to the gate anyway. Even if you're convinced you're too late, there is no downside to trying. If the door is truly closed, you'll at least get confirmation directly from the source. If there's even a sliver of flexibility left, that's where it will be found. Walking away without checking removes your only chance before it even exists. If the agent says the flight is closed, accept that reality and shift focus immediately. Don't argue about what should have happened. Ask what can happen next. This subtle change in mindset opens doors that anger closes. A simple, calm question about rebooking, standby options, or alternative routes invites cooperation instead of resistance. Move quickly, but not chaotically. Head to customer service or the nearest help desk while simultaneously checking the airline's app. Sometimes the app will offer rebooking options faster than a human can. Other times, a human can access options the app won't show you. Using both gives you the best chance of finding something workable. If you have connections or special circumstances, mention them clearly and briefly. Airlines are more likely to help when they understand the full context. This isn't about exaggerating or dramatizing. It's about giving the agent the information they need to advocate for you within the system. Stay polite, even if you're exhausted. This isn't about being submissive. It's about recognizing that the person in front of you didn't create the problem, and maybe the only one who can help solve it. People are more willing to go the extra mile for someone who treats them like an ally instead of an obstacle. If you're offered standby, take it. Standby lists are often fluid, and seats open up more frequently than passengers expect. Even if it doesn't work out, being on the list keeps you in the system. Walking away removes you from consideration entirely. Finally, learn from the experience without letting it ruin your relationship with travel. Airports are complex environments, and delays happen for reasons that aren't always visible. Build in buffer time when you can. Treat boarding cutoffs as hard deadlines, not suggestions. And remember that being early once is far less painful than being 2 minutes late. Missing a flight by 2 minutes feels like the cruelest version of bad luck. But it's rarely about luck alone. It's about timing, systems, and how you respond when things don't go your way. Understanding what actually happens behind that closed gate doesn't make the moment easier, but it does give you power the next time you find yourself running through an airport, hoping you're not already too late.